Last week we had the biggest convention in the world take place in Cologne that brought us a slew of new information and cool stuff to look forward to. I had the pleasure of going to the convention, checking out the sites, and trying out new games like the incredibly anticipated Monster Hunter Wilds, the first Berserker Kazan, Phantom Blade Zero, and more. Stick around because we have a lot to go through. To start things off, let's talk about arguably the biggest showing of Gamescom 2024, Monster Hunter Wilds. I had the pleasure of waiting in line to play their demo, and while I am sad I didn't get to capture any footage, I still had a great time. Considering time was against me, I decided to skip over the character creation and any cutscenes and jump straight into the action. The demo started with a nice set piece where I'm riding the new mount called the Sacred, trying to save a runaway girl from a herd of monsters. The set piece does a great job of showing off the mount's capabilities, allowing you to jump on rocks, cliffs, and eventually glide through the air effortlessly. Eventually, I make my way to the girl and save her from a pit of quicksand, and making my way out while still being chased by the stampede. It's here the game shows me that I can use the slinger to grapple birds flying through the air, which loads the slinger with a special pod that, when thrown, allows me to keep the stampede at bay, disorienting them. One cutscene skipped later, and now I'm in a camp choosing my weapon. I went for the longsword because while others were just waiting in line to play the demo, I studied the blade. With blade in hand, the game sends me on my merry way to save other people lost in the titular wilds, which leads us to an encounter with a Chotacabra. The game takes a moment to teach me some basic combat techniques and about the new focus mode. After the tutorial ends, you get to fight the monster for real, which is announced by a big Begin Quest title card showing on screen. First thing I noticed was how much more agile the hunter seemed than its Monster Hunter World counterpart. I was able to freely move around with my weapon sheathed at what seemed to be a higher speed and with much more precise turning. Next thing I was made aware of is the changes to the weapon. No longer do I need to sheathe my weapon immediately after a Spirit Slash, and there's also new moves that you can trigger once you reach the red bar state. Aside from that, the focus mode is interesting not just because you can pinpoint and target wounded spots on the monster for extra damage and stagger, but also because hitting them will net you monster materials to help with crafting. That honestly seems to me like an amazing addition to lower the amount of farming you do for monster materials, but I can't help but wonder if the progression system is balanced around this to not have you overflowing with crafting mats. After playing around a little with the new features, it was time to actually fight properly. The game feels great to play and allowed for a satisfying combat experience. The only issue I had with the demo was that it was running on a console at 30 FPS. But hey, it's not that big of an issue, it was a demo, and I'm also interested in playing Monster Hunter Wilds on PC, so I'll wait for it, and I'm sure it's going to be an awesome experience. Outside of that, Monster Hunter Wilds is shaping out to be another success that Capcom can easily and proudly add to their belt. Walking through Gamescom, I stumbled upon this really nice looking booth that belongs to no other than the first Berserker Kazan, developed by Neopol. The first Berserker takes place in the DFO universe, just like DNF Duel, and sees you take control over the titular first Berserker. Betrayed and imprisoned, you're transported through some snowy mountains until by some stroke of luck, your guards are murdered and your cage is torn open. As you are barely able to make your way through the snow, you hear a maniacal voice, excitedly laughing at the prospect of finding a fitting body. This unknown voice wants to push you out of your body and take it for itself, but through sheer willpower, you are able to resist its influence and keep it at bay. From here, the demo starts and allows us to begin our trek through the mountains. The overworld seems to be fairly linear, with one or two branching side paths for you to explore. These side paths might end in a dead end with a chest and the mini-boss to fight. The game plays as you would expect from a Souls-like. You have your stamina bar, your soul equivalent resource that you use to level up your stats, of which there are 5: Vitality, Endurance, Strength, Dexterity, and Willpower. In terms of gear, you are able to equip 5 pieces of armor and 2 accessories, all of which will improve your stats in one way or another. As for weapons, you only had dual wielding available in the demo, but the inventory screen showed 2 other categories of weapons: Greatsword and Spear. Obviously, this is all a demo, so it is not fully representative of the final product, but it definitely gave me a good idea of what to expect. Combat is going to revolve around learning enemy attack patterns, dodging and parrying your way through them. The enemies you will encounter all have a stagger bar. By attacking and parrying enough, you will break the stagger bar and stun the enemy for a good 4 to 5 seconds. precious time in which you can keep attacking the enemy safely, and also unleash a devastating special attack that is only available when the enemy is in this stunned state. After rushing through the mountains for a good 20 minutes or so, I encountered the boss of that level, a giant Yeti. Bosses seem to be very tanky. Either that, or the gear that I had didn't allow for large damage numbers. I think it's most likely the latter. However, the fight itself was very enjoyable. I had to pay close attention to the boss attacks to make sure I parried them properly. I didn't want to dodge much since I was on a timer, and parrying allowed me to chip away at the boss's stagger bar until I got that sweet damage window. You can't spam parry, however, since it has a small cooldown after each use, so you need to make sure you time your parry properly. If you do, there's pretty much nothing you cannot parry, including explosions. However, don't expect to be able to parry the burning ground underneath your feet. The Yeti killed me more times than I would like to admit, and that's mostly because I didn't really know how much I could push an attack before running out of stamina. It felt like I would attack and still have enough stamina to keep parrying, but apparently not. If you do get hit when you're out of stamina, get ready to be stunned and be put into a recovery state for a good little while, just enough for the boss to capitalize on smashing your face into the ground. Eventually, after doing this little parry dance with the boss, I managed to kill it just within the time limit. There was not enough time to try out the other mode the demo had, which was a boss challenge. However, my fight with the Yeti seemed to have attracted the attention of the booth staff. When I turned around, ready to make my leave, I was met with congratulations and was asked to stay a while so that someone from the dev team could talk to me about my experience. I was puzzled at first, but happy to oblige. Apparently, the reason for this excitement was because I was the first one to have been able to defeat the Yeti. That inflated my ego like you wouldn't believe. On the outside, I was all modest and thankful, but on the inside, you better believe I was reveling in the glory of having my gaming skills acknowledged. I was skeptical at first about the first Berserker, but after getting my hands on the game and trying it out for myself, I can safely say that skepticism has evaporated and has given way to excitement. I will be looking forward to playing this game on release, and I expect to have an absolute blast with it. After my short chat with the devs, I picked up a few free goodies for participating in the demo and went on my way to the next game on my list. Quick update. I had some extra time, so I queued back up to try the boss challenge mode. These are 2 boss fights further along in the game's story that saw you in these cool Dark Knight armor sets and even gave you a number of skills you can activate, like a dodge attack, a charged dash attack, and even a Berserker attack where you slash your enemy multiple times in lightning fast succession. I wasn't able to look at these skills in depth, but you will be able to pick and choose what skills you want to equip to enhance your playstyle. Alright, that's all I wanted to say for real this time. On to the next one. Crimson Desert is next on my list, and I am somewhere in the middle when it comes to this one. An open-world action RPG set in a medieval fantasy world with an interesting approach to combat, developed by Pearl Abyss, creators of the MMO Black Desert Online. I like the aesthetics of this game. The protagonist is this grizzled warrior wielding a sword and shield, has a no-nonsense attitude, but seems to have his heart in the right place. I am definitely vibing with Crimson Desert at a first glance. What I don't vibe with is the fact that during my demo time, it felt like I had no idea what I was doing. The controls felt unintuitive, and while I had a conveniently placed card in front of me with the controls mapped out, I have a feeling that was just a drop in the water to all of the things you could actually do in the game. For example, we had a 10-minute video that taught us the controls and how to use them. One of the techniques was stunning your opponent with a shield charge. I think I managed to pull off the charge, but the interaction went completely different to what the video showed. The boss wasn't stunned by this. In fact, I'm not sure if it had any effect at all. This video went in depth and showed a variety of ways your skills can be used, but when you are bombarded with all that information and no chance to put it to practice, you'll just end up feeling overwhelmed. Now, I'm not saying they did a bad job setting up the demo. In fact, I think they did the best job they could have done, given how complex the combat system can be. To be quite honest with you, I didn't know what I was doing. I knew what the buttons did, but I failed to understand how the mechanics and skills interact with one another and how they behave when used against enemy mechanics and skills. My kicks didn't seem to bother the enemy in any way, even though they seemed really effective in the video. I felt that any attack I made left me without any stamina in an instant. I didn't understand how to activate 2 of my 4 skills, and when I did so accidentally, it only seemed to make my character bump into the boss rather than tackle him and then slam his face into the ground. Obviously, I got my ass handed to me so hard, the only way I managed to beat 2 out of the 4 bosses was because the demo had an instant revive option on the game over screen. However, the fights seem to be quite well made, each boss having quite distinct mechanics that the players need to navigate and resolve using different tactics and techniques. Bosses also have multiple phases, and you trigger these by reducing their HP bar to 0. Bosses I fought so far all had 3 phases in total, and with each phase transition you get a nice cutscene showing off the protagonist's struggle with the boss he is fighting. That's another part I like about Crimson Desert. It looks like the game is doubling down on this feeling of you being just an above-average warrior. The fights make you feel like you're barely keeping up with the boss, and the cinematic transitions accentuate that feeling. You're no godlike being with unfathomable powers. You are struggling to fight, to win, and every one of these boss fights takes the wind out of you and then some. It's physical, it's gritty and unpleasant, and sometimes your character gets beat down so hard you're wondering from where does he get the strength to stand back up. This feeling might change when the game releases and we know more about the world and story that will be told, but from what I've seen so far, I think Crimson Desert will be a good choice for you to spend your time on. I'll remain optimistic about this game, as I believe that my flawed experience with the demo is due to the lack of my understanding the game's intricacies rather than a failure on the demo's part. I remember when I first saw the online trailer for this game and blew me and many other people away with how action-packed it was. A dynamic and fluid combat style that looks impossible to pull off outside of a cinematic, amazing set pieces, myriad of skills to choose from to customize your playstyle to your liking. This game has everything. So imagine my surprise when I accidentally stumbled upon Phantom Blade Zero's booth not in one of the 3 main halls of Gamescom, but quietly tucked away in the indie area. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, S-Game, the developer behind Phantom Blade Zero, is an indie company. You honestly wouldn't think that's the case given how the game looks. And look amazing it does, with an art style that inspires a dark, depressing world ravaged by war and full of men and monsters that want you dead. You take on the role of a white-haired Ronin-type character clad in black. You only have 66 days to live, and there's an entire slew of characters that want nothing more than to see you gone. This looks like it'll be a good old-fashioned story about revenge, as the protagonist intends to take his heart back. Whether that's meant literally or metaphorically is up to anyone's guess, but this is the premise we're given, and it's a great reason to dive deep into the game. My demo experience was one of the best I've ever had. Once I managed to get seated, controller in hand, I was accompanied by one of the staff members so that they could explain the game controls and mechanics to me. As this was happening, I was ushered through the tutorial, which quickly explained what my combos were, the weapons I have at my disposal, the secondary weapons, the block and parry system, dodging, and the active skills. Let me just say that I was immediately impressed by the fact that I was not able to tell when a combo started and when another began. The combat is so fluid, it feels like your character could string combos together for an eternity if he wasn't limited by the stamina bar. So I blazed my way through the tutorial quite quickly and was thrown into the first demo level, which saw me making my way into an enemy camp. I had to defeat a handful of bandits before I would be greeted by the bandit leader himself. Right off the bat, the combat feels so satisfying, quickly taking my #1 spot of favorite game at Gamescom. Throughout the demo, I could not help but have a massive grin on my face because I was having that much fun playing. The bandit leader himself charged at me, and I was quite happy to greet him with a few shots from my bow and then an even more impactful fully charged cannon blast. Yes, these are the secondary weapons at your disposal. My main weapons, however, were the 2 blades you could dual wield or a single one-handed sword. The bandits' attack patterns weren't too hard to parry and quickly showed me how valuable it is to take the risk against special attacks. In Phantom Blade Zero, the enemy bosses have attacks that give off this light. Blue means you can parry, red means you need to dodge. Parry or dodge at the right time and your character jumps into the enemy's blind side using this shadowy form and unleashes a devastating attack. But wait, there's more. The more you fight, the more your weapons will fill up their meter, allowing you to use their special skills. Expend one of these special skills and you'll be able to interrupt his attack and wail on him like there's no tomorrow. Once I was done with the bandit leader, I was teleported to the next boss encounter where I had a staff as my weapon this time around and a fire-breathing dragon head as my secondary weapon. This boss was even more aggressive than the last, and I started to get a good feel of the flow of combat with parrying the enemy blows and dishing out my own attacks. Once I was done with this encounter, I was teleported to the third and final battle. This one was an executioner, and the staff member accompanying me asked if I wanted to see something cool. I replied with yes, and he encouraged me to start the boss fight and not do anything. I agree, and proceed to see the boss wind up a red attack, throwing his flail upwards into the air only for it to land squarely on my head. I realize that is not a flail, but a cage with saws. After the cage locked around my head, the boss summarily tugged on it, ripping my head off. Yes, that is a one-shot kill. It doesn't matter how much HP you have. If that lands on you, you are dead. I was quickly informed afterwards that I can avoid this attack by running up one of the pillars in the boss room. This was great and also allowed me to launch my own attack in response. The fight was more difficult as the boss had aggressive attack patterns as well as really strange wind-up animations. But eventually, I managed to bring home the kill, which resulted in the end of the demo with about an 8-minute clear time and 2 deaths. Which should actually be just 1 because the first death was at the behest of the staff member. I mean, I'm not, keeping count, but I'm just saying, technicalities and stuff, right? Afterwards, the staff asked me if I wanted to try the hard mode, to which I replied with hell yes. They loaded it up, sent me in, and I immediately figured out that I cannot just trade blows with the bosses anymore because they will kill me in one combo if I allow them to catch me off guard. I needed to be very careful in my approach, make sure I had enough stamina and parry and dodge at the moment's notice. After finishing the hard mode, I was asked if I wanted to do an interview, and I was so hyped I could not contain my excitement. I was completely unprepared for this following the high of getting to play a really fun game, so I just asked whatever questions popped up in my head at the time. The interviewer was very nice, letting me ask my questions, and then asked me how I felt about the game. Told him all of my thoughts about the game, and then, after the interview was over, I left feeling like I had just achieved nirvana. Thank you to all the folks at the S-Game booth. I had an amazing time with you all and your game, and I hope Phantom Blade Zero is met with the success it so rightly deserves. Okay, full disclosure, I am definitely not the target audience for this game, but I most certainly wanted to give this a try just based off of how badass the booth looks like. This one will be shorter simply because of how the game is set up. You go in, sit down, and start creating your character. You're faced with the gallows where your potential protagonist is shackled and with a noose around his neck. I chose the monk, which is a decision I now regret, and was shown how my character's noose conveniently snapped when the trapdoor was triggered, allowing him to quickly make his escape by throwing himself in the ocean. Coming back to shore, I was allowed to take control and start my campaign to conquer this new land, so I picked up the closest thing I could use as my weapon. A stick. I wasted no time in heading deeper into the land where I fought an amalgamation of enemies from wild animals to bandits until I reached the camp. This will become our first foothold in this area and will have shops and quest givers. Quickly skipping over the quest text to make good use of the limited time I had, I left camp in pursuit of my quest objective. I quickly realized how slow the game felt, making my positioning in regards to my surrounding enemies feel quite important. I couldn't allow myself to get surrounded at this level, otherwise I'd be summarily put into the ground. The skills I had unlocked didn't help either, as one was a dash attack that executed an enemy if it was beneath a certain HP threshold, the other was a lightning slam that felt really weak to use. I honestly feel like just using basic attacks was better DPS. I had figured out that the dash attack gave me a resource that would make my lightning slam even more impactful, dealing increased damage and having a much larger AoE. I do have to say, the visuals for the upgraded lightning slam were beautiful. Lightning arcs flowing out from my staff uncontrollably in search for an unfortunate target that will soon be burnt to cinders. However, even with this new understanding of my abilities, I still felt weak and clunky. I do not expect to have insane one-shotting AoE abilities that mow down hordes of enemies. That comes much later into the game, but it did feel like I was fighting against the game itself when playing. Things started to look much better, however, when, by luck, I got my hands on a yellow rarity crossbow. This thing already felt so much better to play with and made me regret not choosing the marksman character that focused on crossbow skills. I had everything I could ever want: range, mobility, attack power, everything. Ever since I got the crossbow, I never wanted to look at my skills ever again. It was just that much better. Throughout my demo experience, I managed to fight around 3 bosses. A bandit leader, which forced me to dodge through his attacks, a banshee that summoned ads to help her rip me limb from limb, which I couldn't beat, and a corrupted tree creature that had so many telegraphed AoE attacks that I legitimately felt like I was in a Final Fantasy XIV boss fight. Opening the skill tree menu, I was greeted with another iteration of the very thing that stopped me from understanding Path of Exile. A giant skill tree with so many active and passive nodes strung together in a jumble that theory crafters will have to decipher in order to find the best combinations for top tier builds. This is the beast, the abomination that has kept me from playing Path of Exile, overwhelming me with a barrage of information that crushes me underfoot. It has been my hated enemy for a very long time. Now, I can definitely see how the game would be fun to play, especially for die-hard fans of ARPGs, and while I'm not a fan myself, even I can tell that this will be a quality game and will hit the ground running on launch day. I might actually give this game a try myself to see if I can actually have fun with this type of game and if I can defeat my most dreaded foe, the skill tree. I was so happy to see Little Nightmares 3 at Gamescom this year and actually get to play the demo. Ever since I played the first installment in the series, I have been hooked on this world's lore and atmosphere, the kind of which I have never seen anywhere else. I believe with all my heart that when it comes to horror games, you will never find another game that is as unique in its visual style and overall vibe as Little Nightmares. Is what I would say had I not been completely blindsided by Reanimal. What happened? This game came out of nowhere. Another game with the same look and feel as Little Nightmares, and I couldn't be happier. I have so many questions. Is this a sequel? A prequel? Maybe a spiritual successor? Does it take place in the same universe, or is this something entirely new? Are we going to see 6 or mono? I have absolutely no idea, but seeing Reanimal and Little Nightmares together made me feel like my birthday came twice in the same day. It seems that the developers for the original Little Nightmares, Tarsier Studios, has branched out this time, leaving Supermassive Games, the studio they worked with for Little Nightmares 2, to take full control over Little Nightmares 3. Now, Tarsier is working solely on Reanimal. Let's start with Little Nightmares 3. The demo was short, but told me all I wanted to know about the game. Just like the previous entry in the series, you have 2 kids, this time each with their own special ability. You have Alone, who wields a wrench about the same size as her body that she can use as a makeshift lever or to smash walls, and Lo, who has a bow and arrow which he can use to hit faraway objects and shoot down hanging crates. These 2 will be indispensable to one another and will have to work together if they want to survive the unspeakable horrors of this world. A new addition to the game is an umbrella that you can glide with or use to catch wind currents that propel you upwards. I should also add that Little Nightmares 3 is going to be the first game in the franchise that will feature online co-op. So grab a friend and run for your lives together. I won't talk much more about Little Nightmares 3 as I think that this is a game that is best experienced by yourself, but I will say that I felt absolutely teased because just as things were getting interesting in my demo playthrough, the screen faded to black and a thank you for playing appeared immediately after. I want more. So let's get more, but in the form of Reanimal. Let me get this out of the way right now. Yes, Reanimal will also have the option to play cooperatively with a friend just like Little Nightmares 3, so you can share the suffering with that special someone. This demo was a little different. If you've played Little Nightmares before, you will already feel right at home with Reanimal, as they share many similarities. Here, you will also have 2 kids fighting for survival, a brother and a sister. You start the demo in a cold, dark, and damp farm, trying to make your way through. There's a pig, much larger than you, that runs away and hides in a hole right in front of you. It's not long until you reach a certain bridge in the farm, and as you cross it, an unbearable noise makes its way closer and closer. A giant, hairy creature with 8 arms for legs and a wide, gaping maw enters the area and notices you. You run immediately, your only hope of survival residing in outrunning whatever that thing is. The game makes full use of its camera, allowing it the freedom of movement required to properly capture the set pieces and environments you'll be traversing. Not much was shown in regards to other features, but I assume those will be revealed at launch. But you can expect a good chase, as the better part of the demo was spent actively running away from this rabid and ravenous monster that was hot on your trail. This is what you can expect to see whenever Reanimal comes out. A dreadful, terrifying, oppressive world seeking to devour you, chew you up, and spit you out. Quite literally, I might add, because the monster itself isn't the only thing chasing you. There are also these other children with bags and nooses over their heads that are trying to catch you. And by the end of the demo, when the siblings are cornered by the beast, do you realize that these children actually originate from the belly of the beast, only coming to light when the beast decides to spit them out so they can do its bidding. Little Nightmares 3 and Reanimal are both games I am eagerly anticipating, because no other games have been able to give me the same feeling of traversing a warped, twisted, and incomprehensible world that explores the themes of innocence, youth, corruption, and adulthood. I am not ready. Lord, please save me. I do not think I have the time to add yet another gacha game to my already growing roster. But here I am, sitting in line to try out Arknights Endfield. My curiosity be cursed. Right, let's begin. Arknights, a tower defense gacha game that was developed by Hypergriff. Your units are called operators and are the main focus of what you'll be spending your money on, aside from skins and base decorations. I have a love-hate relationship with Arknights. I hate the game because it is a tower defense game, and I'm being perfectly honest here, I suck at tower defense games. No, make that at strategy games in general. When it comes to micromanaging many units at once and having to make many deployment decisions in a short amount of time, my brain just overheats, says screw that, and directs my attention to the fly on the wall. However, I love the game because of the unique setting and visual style that Hypergriff went for. A post-apocalyptic dystopia where calamities can happen anywhere at any time, a situation so desperate that societies had to build literal moving cities and bases to avoid the areas where calamities take place. There are a myriad factions vying for control, trying to control a volatile resource called Originium, class discrimination against the infected, a group of people that have, as their name suggests, been infected by Originium, and, to top it all off, a never-ending war between these factions and Reunion, an organization of desperate infected that are fighting against the discrimination. The character aesthetics are also on point. You've got everything from humans to humans with animal ears to actual beast people to even, I kid you not, angels and demons. And all of their gear is on point too. You've got great selections of military combat gear on almost every single character. You've got combat knives, copious usage of Kevlar, ammo and grenade pouches, tons of belts everywhere, jackets, cloaks, combat bows, giant shurikens, crossbows, lab coats, you name it, some Arknight character somewhere surely has it. In the middle of all this, you take on the role of the Doctor, an amnesiac human that apparently was the leading authority on Originium research and on trying to find a cure for the infected. But somehow, you're also a tactical genius, and everyone is more than willing to listen to your commands, even though you lost all your memories, because that's just how good you are. You work for a pharmaceutical company called Rhodes Island that honestly feels more like a mercenary company than anything else. Funny how you can recall the tactical stuff but not the medical research part, which honestly sounds more important to solving the ongoing global crisis. The Doctor must have wanted a career change for a while and took advantage of being kidnapped to go, yeah, listen, I totally lost my memory, teehee. But now it's finally time to talk about Arknights Endfield, which is Hypergriff's attempt at using the Genshin Impact effect to make a name for themselves in the industry. Why did I spend all this time talking about Hypergriff's first game instead of the one I actually demoed? Well, there's a reason for that, my good man and/or woman. Arknights Endfield has been shown to take place on an entirely different planet called Talos 2, but somehow it seems that Originium has made its way here along with another phenomenon called the Blight. Not much is known about the Blight at this point in time. It is safe to assume that Arknights Endfield is taking place in very much the same universe and possibly within the same time frame as the original Arknights. Another argument for this is the fact that there are characters in Arknights Endfield that have a striking similarity to the ones already existing in the original Arknights. Like this girl, looking eerily similar to Kal'tsit, or this other girl bringing to mind Chen, etc. One of these teased characters, namely Angelina, looks exactly the same as their original counterpart. Now, I have done a bit of research on Endfield Angelina, and it seems she might be a clone. I don't mind the idea of cloning in the world as Arknights, but I hope they don't use it as a cheap way of just bringing in characters from the original game into Endfield. Anyway, in Arknights Endfield, you take on the role of the Administrator, the highest authority on the planet that was sent to most likely colonize Talos 2 and set up a resource mining operation for organizations back on Earth. The Administrator is also an amnesiac waking up from cryo-sleep, and you struggle to figure out what exactly your role is in this world and how you'll go about fulfilling it. The world of Talos 2 isn't a complete open world, it is actually a collection of instance zones that you can travel through. You'll be able to run around in a party of 4 characters, collecting resources, materials, and chests as you go, while also encountering enemies like bandits, outcasts, and some strange rock creatures with halos called the Angeloi. Combat was a bit of a surprise for me, as it's not really what I was expecting, and yet it very much feels like what Hypergriff would come up with. Combat is this mix between active combat and turn-based combat, reminiscent of the ATB system found in Final Fantasy games. You can freely move around in combat and even attack at will with normal basic attacks, but the damage is quite small, and I quickly realized that the main source of damage from a character will be from their skills and ultimates. However, unlike games like Withering Waves, Genshin Impact, and ZZZ, there is no dodge button, so you won't be able to iframe your way out of an enemy attack. Your only hope for making sure you stay alive seems to be either copious amounts of health restoring items, as well as your ability to avoid telegraphed attacks by simply moving out of them or jumping over them. There is another option available, but that will depend on the roster of characters you bring with you in the fight. Each character has a skill and an ultimate, and some of these skills will allow you to effectively stun or interrupt your enemy, cancelling any telegraphed attacks. Knowing this, I realized that fights in this game tend to focus more on controlling the flow of battle with well-timed uses of your skills, rather than unleashing your skills on cooldown for extra damage. Some telegraphed attacks are easy to get out of without using your skills, but some are fast enough or cover a vast enough range that you simply can't get out in time. It's here where those control skills will be most valuable and should be kept for a rainy day. Of course, the squad of characters I had at my disposal was the starting cast, so I'm sure this might not be the case when those more powerful premium operators come out that will have more utility and damage mixed into their skills. Ultimates, on the other hand, aren't gained by some sort of energy mechanic. Instead, you get them after you hit a certain number of enemies with your skills. Let's say you have a skill that deals damage in a small cone in front of you and requires a total of 5 enemies to be hit to charge your ultimate. If you somehow manage to manipulate your enemy's position so that they all fit in that small cone, then you can charge your ultimate with just one use of your skill. Don't worry about having to time it just right, since the time slows down drastically whenever you use a skill. After testing out the exploration in the demo, I was loaded into a boss fight where I had to fight some weird geometry that kept firing lasers at me, hurled red balls that I had to avoid that are very reminiscent of Nier Automata, and also sent out ground shockwaves that I physically had to jump over. It even went invisible at one point, and I had to knock it out by correctly positioning my skills over the area where the boss was hiding to knock it out. The last section of the demo was showing off this game's base building aspect. Much like the original Arknights, where you manage Rhodes Island to receive various resources and keep your operators happy, on Talos 2 you will be managing an entire area where you can build your base in fashion not unlike Satisfactory or Death Stranding. Yes, I know there are 2 very different genres of games, but they are similar to both. It's similar to Death Stranding in the idea that you can build all sorts of buildings to help you out, including this zipline that allows you to ride at high speeds through your base. Meanwhile, it is similar to Satisfactory because you're going to need to plan out a production line to efficiently gather resources with miners, send them through conveyor belts into refineries, down more conveyor belts into assemblers, and eventually whatever products the game will allow you to create. I didn't interact much with the base building aspect because I was simply overwhelmed by the amount of buildings that were available, all of them serving functions I didn't know about, and I was afraid that if I messed with any of these machines, I'd be effectively pulling the last piece, causing this massive wobbly Jenga tower to crash down on me. And that's the whole demo. I will be looking forward to trying out Arknights Endfield when it comes out. I'm not sure how engaged I will be with the gameplay, even though it does look fun and a much better alternative for my brain than the original Arknights, but I am very keen on experiencing the world building of the Arknights universe again and see what stories might be told there. Gamescom has been a blast for me, and while there were so many games available to try out, there was sadly not enough time to get to them all due to how large the queue times were. Even in the indie and retro areas, there were huge crowds of people all looking to try out the next cool game. There's nothing like the atmosphere of Gamescom, where you can literally feel the joy and the anticipation in the air, both for players seeking out their next game, but also from developers who want to show off the hard work and effort they've put into their projects. I can't wait to go again next year, but until then, I've got some games to catch up on. Namely, Black Myth Wukong, because that game launched right in the middle of the damn convention. Video on Black Myth Wukong next, stay tuned. But that's gonna be it for me. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a sub, a like, a comment, and all that jazz for the algorithm gods, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, have a good one.